Some role-playing game skills are basically must-haves. You've got your lockpicking, your one-handed weapons, and your healing magic. But then there are other skills. Skills it feels like the designers added just to fill out a list or as a trap for a novice player. Skills so bad, you'd be better off sealing your XP into a bag and throwing it into a river. Which brings us to this week's episode. This is the History of RPGs, powered by Summoner's War. The most useless RPG skills. Let's get into it. Number 6, swimming, Deus Ex. In a game full of sneaking around military bases and submarines, you might think there'd be some value in investing your hard-earned XP into a skill that will allow you to swim faster and stay underwater longer. You would be wrong. There are less than a half dozen times you'd ever get any real benefit out of this skill in the entire game, and what's more, it's not that hard to find an item that'll just lead you to breathe underwater, thus rendering the entire skill moot. Today, swimming is pretty much a joke in the Deus Ex community, a symbol that in Ion Storm's heroic attempt to simulate everything and give the player tons of choices, some of those choices were inevitably the wrong ones. Number 5, Speechcraft, every Elder Scrolls. Elder Scroll games don't really allow you to talk your way out of stuff. Indeed, every outing to Tamriel since Morrowind has overemphasized combat more or less to the exclusion of charismatic conflict. But every game insists on maintaining a speechcraft skill out of presumably a desire to appeal to the few players who still want to believe they can solve problems with something more subtle than a sword to the face. In practice, however, speechcraft is almost always a waste. At best, it lowers merchant prices, but considering that A, merchants don't sell anything you can't find or craft yourself, and B, their prices aren't really that unreasonable in the first place, you'd be better off putting another point into magic, stealth, or swordsmanshippery. Swordsmanshippery. It's my first screen name. Number 4, security, Knights of the Old Republic. Lockpicking. In a game where every door is either impossible to get through until you finish the requisite plot tasks or can simply be bashed open with sufficient force, this skill does literally nothing that you can't do with a Wookiee, a vibroblade, and a can-do attitude. Useless. Number 3, combat shooting, Wasteland. Beyond having the most adorable skill name in existence, this skill from the original Wasteland caused a lot of player confusion upon the game's release. For a long time, players ran the numbers and data mined to find out exactly what, if anything, combat shooting modified that investing in individual gun types didn't. Even Brian Fargo, the game's creator, admitted he didn't know what combat shooting did. Bold move, Brian. Eventually, players uncovered the truth. It did nothing. Literally nothing. Apparently, the game wasn't supposed to ship with combat shooting as a choosable skill, or it was a bug or something. Either way, it certainly wins a spot on this list for being literally valueless. Number 2, Freeze, Summoner's War. Freeze is an ability that's pretty self-explanatory. Your monster uses it to freeze an enemy monster in place so they are unable to attack for a turn. It's fun, it's useful, and it's exactly like this other ability, Stun, in every way. Both abilities have the exact same effect and both are countered in the exact same way. Maybe it's because they have water monsters and it makes sense to have ice freeze water. Maybe they wanted to use it so they don't have to call a monster the number 1 stunner. We don't know why, we'll probably never know why, and honestly, it's probably better that way. They have their reasons, they're game companies, they're busy, okay? Don't bother them, moving on. Number 1, performance, D&D. Performance, for those of you not familiar, represents your ability to, perform. Sing, dance, play music, and so on. Look, the point is no one has ever used this skill in the history of Dungeons & Dragons. Why? Well, because you asked. Almost any time you can imagine performing, it'd be easier to just use a different skill. Gotta do some gymnastics to dazzle a crowd of bored elves? Use acrobatics. Gotta chat someone up so they'll give you something they don't want to give? Use persuasion, intimidation, or deception. Performance is one of those skills that basically never comes up unless you're a bard, and even then, you'll probably feel like a doofus for investing points into it when you could have been spending it on something better, like any of the other charisma-based abilities. Granted, if you've been foolish enough to invest in performance, then your DM is honor-bound to contrive of some situation where the only way for you and your friends to survive complete annihilation is to put on a fantasy rendition of Hamilton with all references to America replaced with Neverwinter. Alright, those are the most useless RPG skills that we could find in all of existence. Are we wrong? Is there a more useless skill? Well, why don't you educate us for once and put something in the comments? And while you're at it, like and subscribe. And come back next week, because we'll have probably one more of these. I don't know, if you keep watching them, we'll still make them. Look, do you like this? Answer me, teens!